It is well known that the Russian anarchist Bakunin was an anti-Semite. What isn't talked about enough is that he also had extremely problematic views on indigenous people. He was against what he called the gradual extermination of indigenous people in America and advocated the destruction of all forms of colonialism. Despite this fact, he also adopted a descriptive model of history, which was first developed by the French and Scottish Enlightenment, that had colonial elements in it. He thought that society evolved from simplicity to complexity as the mode of production and exchange changed. Different economic stages were placed on a ladder, and as societies develop, they climb up the ladder and advance to a new economic system, such as going from hunter-gatherers to agricultural slavery to feudalism to industrial capitalism. The result is that hunter-gatherer societies can be described as simplistic and less advanced relative to industrial capitalism. This worldview led him to write the following about societies like the Inuit in 1869. Animals are clearly much more attached to the traditional customs of the collectivity to which they belong than are men. This patriotic attachment is unavoidable for them, and they can shake it off only under man's influence. Likewise, in human collectivities, the less advanced the civilization, the simpler and less complex is the very foundation of social life, and the more intense is natural patriotism, i.e., the instinctive attachment of individuals to all the material, intellectual, and moral habits that represent the traditional and customary life of a particular collectivity, as well as their hatred for everything different and foreign. From this it follows that natural patriotism is inversely proportional to the degree of civilization, which latter is the very triumph of human nature among human societies. No one will dispute the instinctive or natural patriotism of the wretched tribes inhabiting the Arctic Circle, which have hardly been touched by civilization and whose material life is stricken by poverty, is infinitely stronger and more exclusive than the patriotism of, for example, a Frenchman, an Englishman, or a German. The Frenchman, the Englishman, and the German can live and acclimatize themselves anywhere, while the native of the polar regions would very soon perish of homesickness, were he far removed from there. And yet, how much poorer and less human his existence is. This shows again that, far from being a mark of humanity, the intensity of natural patriotism is a mark of animality. This is obviously just nonsense, especially the remark that they live a less human existence. Later in the essay, Bakunin makes a very strange remark that makes way more sense when you locate the passage in its historical context. He writes, "The hunter, as well as the herdsman, takes to agriculture only with great repugnance. So we see still today among the savage peoples of America, for example, that it is onto the comparatively weaker creature, the woman, that the hardest and most distasteful domestic labours fall. Men know no occupations other than hunting and warring, which our own civilization still considers the most noble callings, and disdaining all other occupations, they remain slothfully recumbent, smoking their pipes, while their unhappy wives, these natural slaves of the barbarian, succumb to the burden of their daily toil. One step later in civilization, and the slave takes the part of the women. An intelligent beast of burden, forced to bear the whole load of physical labour, he produces the leisure and intellectual and moral development of his master." This was an extremely common take at the time within mainstream sociology. During the period, it was often claimed that the role of women in society was a key marker of its location on the ladder of historical development. At the top of the ladder is Western industrial civilization, in which an extremely complex division of labour ensures that women don't engage in productive labour, and so can fully devote themselves to being mothers. At the bottom of the ladder is hunter-gatherer societies in the rest of the world, where women do most of the labour, and men either relax or go hunting and fight wars. This was then used by sexists to argue that women should be excluded from the workforce because savage women work, civilized women don't. There are several kind of empirical problems with this view. One, it's a mistake to make sweeping generalizations about hunter-gatherer societies. They vary significantly from one another. a 2005 study by the anthropologist Nicole Waguespack found that as the proportion of hunted meat in a diet increases, women devote less time to getting food, and the number of additional tasks that women exclusively or mostly do also tends to increase, such as leather working or house building. The result is that the sexual division of labour can vary significantly between societies that are predominantly hunting-based or predominantly gathering-based. It is furthermore the case that women who gather also hunt. To quote the anthropologist Robert Kelly, women in foraging societies do hunt small game regularly and occasionally large game. Sometimes women set out intentionally to hunt small game. Martu women in Western Australia, for example, frequently hunt goannas and skinks. In many other foraging societies, women hunt small game opportunistically, setting out to gather plant food and changing plans if they encounter small game. The hunting of large game is usually men's work. The second major issue with the theory is that it ignores very obvious facts about the 19th century, such as huge numbers of women being factory workers at the time, poor women being hired by rich women as servants and maids, or the fact that lots of poor women worked from home manufacturing items for sale via the putting out system, whilst also doing housework. Rich women didn't toil, but the same was not true of working class women. Male social theorists from affluent backgrounds ignored this because by women they didn't mean all women, they meant their mothers, wives, and sisters. Bakunin didn't subscribe to this aspect of the theory, but he did absorb the general point that the shift from hunter-gatherer to slave societies involves a major change to the sexual division of labour. I think this ignores a lot of evidence. To give a single example, in ancient Athens, the wives of male citizens would supervise slaves doing domestic labour and be a kind of household manager, but were also expected to join in and work themselves, especially at weaving. It is also the case that the kind of labour a slave engages in depends on whether or not they are a man or a woman, so even if slaves are doing labour that wives previously did, this labour is still structured by a sexual division of labour. So Bakunin framing this as slaves taking the part of women is misleading, since lots of slaves were also women doing women's work. When studying anarchist history, it's important to talk about both anarchist rights and anarchist wrongs, and this is something Bakunin was very wrong about. As always, the sources are in the description. Sorry for the lack of videos lately. I'm working on a very long intellectual history of transgender as a concept. I've written around 5,000 words, but I still have a lot more to cover and research, and can't wait for everyone to be able to listen to it.